everyone. I get to talk to author Mark Shaw again, and we're talking about his newest book that just came out called Denial of Justice, and it is the second book on Dorothy Kilgallen, and he goes into so much detail. This book is incredible. His research is unbelievable. Okay. And today, as I talked to him today, and I also had watched the George H.W. Bush funeral. And so I want to hear what he has to say about that because I know he's going to have something to say about it. So, everybody, here is Mark.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited today because I get to speak with author Mark Shaw again, and we are going to talk about his brand new book. Just came out almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago. It's called Denial of Justice, Dorothy Kilgallen, Abuse of Power, and the Most Compelling JFK Assassination Investigation in History. And it's a long title, but I think it sums it up. So I love it.
Good.
Yeah. I don't know if I told you this the last time, but I've always been interested in the JFK assassination ever since I started reading books, 20 years ago, and just not buying what they said.
Right.
The more I dove into it, the more I was like, I don't know. That just doesn't sound right. It all just didn't, it was all too neatly wrapped up or something,
Yeah, I think that's the case. It was wrapped up for the American public and the world by J. Edgar Hoover, who kept yelling, "It's this nut Oswald, and that's it, and don't think about anything else." And he really brainwashed everybody with all of that, brainwashed them that there wasn't any plot to kill the president or anything like that. And there was really only one journalist, one reporter who didn't buy it, and that was Dorothy Kilgallen.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me. I mean, first of all, everybody, he had the first book, which, when did that come out? I was going to write
The Reporter
that
Who
down.
Knew Too Much came out first part of last year, and so blessed it was a bestseller, and the movie rights have been purchased and all of that. So people are probably going to wonder, why in the world did I write a second book? And we can talk about that.
Yeah, I was so excited to hear that, because it definitely should be. But, so when you read that book, I mean, this book, I felt like you just dove into detail, and I get happy about detail. So,
Well, it shows like yours that give me the opportunity, and I thank you, to talk about Dorothy and her story, because people should know that with The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, I think at last count we had 800 and some emails from people around the world, from Iceland and Argentina and Australia, everywhere, and in the U.S. especially. But a lot of people would get in touch with me, and they either knew Dorothy, or they knew somebody who knew Dorothy, or they knew something about her life and times and What's My Line and everything else she did, or they knew something about her JFK assassination and her death. And so that's the reason the second book is possible, because of listeners like those that listen to your program. And so I'm beholding to you, because otherwise there would have been no new book.
Well, I want to tell everybody how you start this book off, because it shows your writing and why it's so compelling, because this could just be any other book, Mark, but with your writing is what makes it read like a novel to me. Like, it's just,
thank you.
So I'm going to read the very beginning.
Okay, sure.
You start off the book. If Dorothy Kilgallen had not been so enthralled with Lee Harvey Oswald's assassin, roly-poly 53-year-old Jacob Rubenstein, also known as Jack Ruby, the first time she laid eyes on him up close, she may have lived a long and fruitful life. And when I read that, I got chills. Okay?
Wow,
I was just like,
wonderful.
wow, what a way. Good job. It's like talking to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, Mark, what a great way to start this book. I loved it.
Well, it's interesting because, in any creative, endeavor, whether it's music or motion pictures, or I don't know, if people haven't seen Bohemian Rhapsody, for instance, they should go see that, because, motion pictures, and writing, poetry, whatever it may be, there's a magic to it at times. And I think anybody will tell you who does that, sometimes you never know where the ideas come from. Bohemian Rhapsody is so fascinating because the great music of Queen, you learn about where those ideas, came into to those people's heads and everything. Well, in this situation with the first book and with this one, for some reason there's a magic about them, and I've touched people's emotions with the first book and now this one, and I think, Dorothy's had something to do with that from the hereafter. I think she chose me to write her story and everything, but looking back, if you ask me why I started the book that way, I probably couldn't be real sure why, except that I just realized that the first time she laid eyes on Jack Ruby, that they were a toxic mix, I think I said, and both of them were doomed, and that's why I guess that I decided to start the book that way.
Yeah, and I love how you really go in this book. I mean, you touched on it in the other one about the Sam Shepard case, okay?
Mm-hmm,
But I felt like with this one, you really got into the fact that she really had like this sixth sense about her.
Yeah,
like when she met people, it felt like, she knew them. Or so, I don't know. Like, you tell me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard anybody say that. That's a good perception, and we have to kind of wonder where that came from. Of course, she was a college dropout, and she talked to her father, who was a great journalist himself, well respected, to get her an internship at the New York Journal of America, and that turned into a incredible career. The New York Post finally called her the most powerful female voice in America. But yeah, you've got a good point there. She had an instinct about people. She was curious. She would, once she latched on to something, as Bennett Cerf said, one of her colleagues at What's My Line, Dorothy went full bore. She really got into it and everything. But right away, for instance, she sized up Jack Ruby. And she didn't focus on Oswald. She thought he was a dead end, too much confusion there. But Ruby, she could get into. And I think you saw in the first part of the book there, I printed for the first time this column she wrote, Ruby Stars at Last. Because she took one look at him in the courtroom, and the writing is just, superb in terms of describing him. And here's kind of this strip club owner, and all at once now he's probably the most famous man in America. And so she sized him up, and she thought, hey, there's more to Jack Ruby than most people know. And that's what led her on this drive to solve the JFK assassination, and ultimately led to her death.
Yeah, and thinking today, of course, everybody spent the day with George H.W. Bush's funeral, and I thought it was so fitting for me.
Well, not everybody. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I did. I wasn't gonna, but then I did. I got stuck right into it, started watching it, and but it made me think, because of just reading this book, about how our country, thinking about then. Like, I was born in '64, so I was,
yes,
I wasn't there.
Yes.
Okay. But I did make me think about, our country and how we celebrate things and what it must have been like. I mean, he was 94. Okay. This is no shock. This is no, but when it happened to Kennedy, which is when this all started, what it must have been like. I can't even imagine. And how, where it all started for her and her thoughts to it, and just not accepting. Just being like, no, this is just...
Well, I can tell you, it shows my age, but I was in college, and I remember the announcement coming over the radio or loudspeaker or something in the dorms that JFK had died, and I think everybody was just numb. Numb would be the best word I could think of. You really couldn't move. You really couldn't talk. You really couldn't act in any ways. They canceled classes at the university, and everybody just sat around like, did this really happen? And I think that was a big shock, of course, and people tried to get over here. And then we have a couple of days later, and we find out that this main suspect that they're parading before the camera is Lee Harvey Oswald, and J. Edgar Hoover shouting, Oswald alone, he gets killed. And that's what, was mind-boggling that could happen, two assassinations like that in a couple of days. And Dorothy didn't see it. She didn't understand how that could happen, and she started looking into this. But she did so personally, as you remember, because she had taken her little son, Kerry, in the third grade to the White House. Pierre Salinger had set up a little introduction with President Kennedy. He fussed over the little boy, looked at letters he brought from the third grade class, gave him a PT-109 pin and all of that. and Dorothy just couldn't believe how kind he was. So when he died, and I'll be summarizing what it says in the book, but basically she wrote what she remembered was a tall man stooping over a little boy, looking at the letters he brought from his third grade class. This is the man who was assassinated in Dallas. And that launched an 18-month investigation into JFK's death. So, right away Dorothy smelled a rat, and she was going to follow her nose, her instincts, and all of that, and that's why she's the most credible reporter with regard to the JFK assassination history. There's no question about that.
Hmm. Well, and you go a little bit into her relationship with Frank Sinatra, and just for everybody, for everybody else, just to give them a little. I don't like giving a lot out. I want them to read the book.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
But what is your perspective? Like, do you feel like he knew it wasn't going to be good for her? Like,
well, there's a lot of angles to Frank Sinatra in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Denial of Justice is written for people who read the first book and who didn't read the first book. But I get into Frank Sinatra a little bit more because I was able to find an interview with Dorothy's husband, and that's another story, of course, but Dorothy's husband, where he saw Frank Sinatra perform in New York City and suggested that Dorothy come with him to watch Frank, and she did, and she was mesmerized by him and his talent, and she wrote about him in her column. I mean, they were friends. And there's a picture there's about 40 new images in the book, and I'm not sure if I remember I think one of them is Frank and Dorothy together at ABC Radio. They were friends and everything. Well, that all turned around. And what happened was that Dorothy started writing about Sinatra's relationship with the mafia buddies and also his bimbo girlfriends and how they were just a joke and how he used women and everything. Well, Frank didn't like that. So he started sending out messages about her in his Las Vegas act. He said, if you see Dorothy Kilgallen, make sure if you happen to run into Dorothy Kilgallen, make sure it's in a car. He sent her a fake tombstone to her office and all of that. Well, this is the same Frank Sinatra who figures into the JFK assassination because Joe Kennedy knew that JFK was going to lose the election in 1960 to Nixon unless they won Chicago and Illinois and West Virginia. So he used Frank Sinatra as an in-between to get several of the mafia guys, Giancana and Traficante and Marcello and all that, to help them win those states with the promise that when the new administration got in the White House, they would leave those guys alone. Well, they didn't. Bobby Kennedy became Attorney General and went after them, which permitted the motive for killing JFK so Bobby Kennedy would be powerless. Well, Frank Sinatra was involved in all of that. And also you can find out that one of the things that happened when Mickey Cohen, who was a sidekick of all those mobsters and a client of Melvin Belli, who represented Ruby, when Mickey Cohen got arrested and put in prison, the first person to see him when he got out was Marcello, but the first person to give him any money was Frank Sinatra. So Sinatra just weaves himself in and out of all of this. And of course, he didn't have any remorse or any bad feelings about it when Dorothy died. Remember, he said, "Well, I'll have to change my nightclub act now." So they were bitter enemies. The book is still set up as a true crime murder mystery with all of the suspects, and Frank Sinatra is certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm. Which it's just, this just feeds my soul because, I'm talking to so many people about the Frank Sinatra connection and everything. And I just thought you did such an amazing job with showing their relationship because, of course, anybody else who has talked about Frank Sinatra really has never gotten into Dorothy Kilgallen, and you did.
Right.
Right. You're credited for bringing this so much to light of what wasn't there.
Well, thank you. What's interesting these days, you can't go in a restaurant or a bar or anything where there isn't Frank Sinatra either on the radio or over the that isn't playing in there. But what people don't realize, he was a wonderful singer. He's a great singer, a gifted singer. He was a bad guy, and Frank Sinatra, beat up journalists. I have that in the book. There's a picture of him with all of his mobster buddies. I mean, he took their money. They used him. They did this. They did that. I mean, with Sinatra, and he was a bad guy. He treated women just terribly, and all of that. So I sometimes try to tune out when I'm listening to when Frank Sinatra comes on, because I just think, boy, it's just terrible, because an awful lot of people have no idea how bad a guy this guy was.
Yeah, and to tell you how relevant, it's really weird because my son moved into college this year, and I go walking into his dorm room, and his roommate has a mug shot of Frank Sinatra on the wall. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Like, they have no idea. They have no idea, you know?
No, time passes, and we forget. I mean, even the man we're supposed to be honoring here today was a CIA agent, and there was a lot of questions about him in terms of anything he might have had to do with the JFK assassination. I will tell you that right now. And that's been used as one of the reasons why the government and this so-called leader of our country won't go ahead and release a lot of JFK assassination documents, because this guy we're honoring today could very well have been involved in the JFK assassination, and some of those documents may show that. Now, we're going to find out, because now the guy's dead. So there's no excuse for not releasing some of those documents, which were supposed to be released by law last October, and obviously we only got a few of them. So we'll see what happens. But, we forget. They're going to honor this guy today, and for good reason, I suppose, in many ways. But I'm telling you what, there's a dark side to all of that as well.
Well, you know what, it's interesting because I do, I love, I always think, gosh, when we find out this stuff, we just have no idea. We have no idea. And the one time that I caught a glimpse of the no idea is, because I'm a homeschooling mom, and I was watching, I had my kids sit down and watch when Obama got inaugurated, right? When Obama goes up, there's this moment, like he walks up to President Bush at the time, and they're going into the Oval Office where Bush is basically going to tell him the stuff, like the deal. And they show Obama smiling. He walks into the office, and they show him walking back out. And I swear to you, his face is whiter than his face has ever been.
Oh my gosh, is that right? Wow.
There's just this moment. There's this glimpse before he has to put on a smile, like,
Yeah, exactly. And that,
and then Bush is smiling even bigger. He's like, I'm
sure.
I'm gone. See you later.
I'm sure he was. And this is one of the problems with government that we have. We just talked about the documents not being released. People have asked me, why the cover-up of JFK's assassination, and we should talk about these Ruby trial transcripts in a minute, but the cover-up of JFK's assassination, the cover-up of Dorothy's death, the cover-ups all through history here of things that we're not supposed to know. There's no real transparency, and people have asked me, Mark, why is that? And I say, well, there's always going to be the reluctance of government to expose government corruption. And it goes on today because, as you know, I got the New York District Attorney's Office to investigate Dorothy's death, and then they pulled the plug last year for absurd reasons. I'm back at their doorstep again trying to get them to do the right thing here. But you always run up against that obstacle where government is it's almost impossible to get them to expose government corruption because it makes government as a whole look bad. And we run into that today as much as we did 50 years ago.
Yeah, which is also very interesting. Okay, let's dive in a little bit. I just didn't know how far in you wanted to go, for everybody, but let's give them a little taste of the Ruby trial and what.
Yeah, well, there were 3 or 4 reasons I wrote the book. One is I found new evidence about Dorothy's death, especially about the main suspect in her death. It's Ron Pataki, who was a journalist who conveniently came into her life. She shared all of the JFK assassination information with him, including interviewing Ruby at trial and all the other things that she figured out, connecting Ruby, Marcello, and Oswald, all of that. And then she suspected him of leaking that information. Well, I found family members that he admitted to that he was the last person to see Dorothy alive, and that the poems that he wrote, these incriminating poems that really have facts in them only the killer could know, that he wrote those poems. So that's one reason that I did that. Wrote the second book. The second is that I found new information that showed the DA's investigation in New York City was bogus. They never talked to any of the witnesses or found the documents that I asked them for. They never did any of that. And so I found new information about that really made me wonder what they were doing. But the real most important thing was, and this is where Dorothy again has guided me with regard to the investigation into her death and her JFK assassination. I always wondered really why at the end of her life she was so dangerous. She had crossed J. Edgar Hoover with her columns about the assassination, making fun of the Oswald alone theory. She had written about the powerful people who may have masterminded the JFK assassination. These were the enemies that circled as Dorothy moved toward November of 1965, and they knew she was writing a book for Random House that could expose all this, but I didn't really have the smoking gun. And then last summer, one of these readers who gave me tips, a lawyer down in Fresno, Greg Mullinex, called me and said, "Mr. Shaw, I have a gift for you." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I have the Jack Ruby trial transcripts. Would you like to have them?" And I said, "Absolutely. You found them." And he told me how he did. He sent them to me, and 2,000 pages long. If you stack them up, they're 1.5 feet tall. And I took about 2.5 weeks to go through them. And I was just almost every page, especially during the actual testimony. Now, this is Dorothy Kilgallen is sitting in the front row listening and watching this. And Ruby is maybe 20 feet away from her, and she's at the trial and doing all this. And I felt like I was Dorothy as I was listening to this testimony. And the first thing that just hit me hard, and I hope people will go to markshawbooks.com. The publisher wasn't real happy with me about this, but I've put up there, I think it's chapters 15 and 16 or something, but the Ruby trial transcripts pages are in there. We embedded them in the book so people can read them. Well, the first one I found was this, where there was testimony by a person at the Dallas Morning News offices, which faced Daily Plaza. And there's testimony in there from a couple salesmen who put Jack Ruby standing in the offices there at the time JFK is being assassinated and watching it happen from a front window that faces the book depository in Dealey Plaza. Wow. I'm just pausing for effect there because what that means, of course, is that Jack Ruby knew about the assassination before it happened, which is completely contrary to everything he ever said, that he just happened to be by the basement there in the Dallas Police Department, and he just happened to go in, and Oswald just happened to be transferred. That's all just crushed. All that Oswald alone stuff is crazy because obviously he was stalking Oswald, and he knew about the fact that the assassination was going to take place. The second one that will just destroy the Oswald alone theory and shock people is a witness who owned a parking lot across from Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. And Ruby parked his car there for 3 years, came across to that parking lot the day before he shot Oswald. He's on the public telephone. This guy testifies that he hears Ruby asking about when Oswald will be transferred. And then he hears he doesn't hear the answer to that, to what they're talking about. But then he hears Ruby say, and he must have been told when Oswald will be transferred, "I will be there." Well, again, that takes care of everything in terms of, again, this just happening to be coming along and going in the basement. There's also testimony that he made like a reporter to get into the basement, that he used his friends from the Dallas Police Department to get into the basement so he could kill Oswald. So we know that it was part of a plot to kill the president. Obviously, Ruby knew about it before it happened. I even proved that his lawyer, Melvin Belli, knew about it before it happened. Oswald is dead. Ruby's, put on trial. Belli's brought in to silence him and make him look crazy. I mean, Dorothy knew all this. And then after she interviewed Ruby, she went to New Orleans where this mafioso Carlos Marcello was, who had the greatest motive to kill JFK so Bobby would be powerless. She had put it all together. Now, there's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of speculation about the JFK assassination. But this isn't me saying all of this. This isn't anybody else saying this except eyewitness testimony at the Ruby trial. And you can read that for yourself. You can see it. and you can make up your own mind as to what you believe. But when I first read that material, I knew it was gold. I knew it was the final way to be able to prove that without a doubt there was a plot to kill JFK.
That's crazy. And just the fact that you got to, you know, that somebody gave that to you. I mean, what a gift, you know?
Meant to be. Dorothy orchestrated the whole thing, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that, with thinking that way. And, you know, you end the book with that, you know, talking about how you feel very divinely connected to her. And I was thinking, there's no way you could have written this without.
Oh, no. You know, because, you know, I was like everybody else who wrote about the JFK assassination. I wasn't there. All these so-called experts that, you know, never mentioned Dorothy or didn't find these Ruby trial transcripts or anybody else, we all missed everything. But I had Dorothy on my side, and so many, many times I felt her presence, and I know she led me to the transcripts because they're the most important JFK assassination documents in history. There's no question about that.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Well, I love talking to you, Mark. What is next? What are you going to do after this?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop and think a little bit about, I've had some people get in touch with me with regard to more situations where there is an injustice of some sort, whatever it may be, and I'm going to look into those and see if there's anything I might do to try to, you know, see if I can assist in finding the truth about something that happened. But in the meantime, I'm going to still try to get the New York District Attorney's Office to investigate Dorothy's death and see if I can't find the truth about what happened to her. I think that's the most important thing right now, and then we'll see what happens after the first of the year. But, you know, I've just been very blessed to write these two books, and I hope that people will learn. They're all about history, really, and hopefully they'll correct a lot of distortions of history, and that's what I believe will happen if people really pay attention to what's in both books.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel so blessed to just know you and have read your books. I really do because, you know, it makes you look at everything just a little bit differently, I have to say. And, but then, you know, when I finished it, I was just like, wow. I just, there are no words. There just aren't, you know.
You're the best.
Amazing.
You're the best. And like I say, it's people like you that make the books possible. And hopefully if there's any listeners out there that have any information about Dorothy or the JFK assassination, whatever, I hope they'll get in touch with me.
Well, you know, and if anything comes to light with, you know, any of the records that are going to be released anytime, I mean, you just, you keep me up to date. You just,
I will
if
for
you want to talk, anytime you want to talk, you just let me know and we'll chat.
Certainly will. And thank you again for having me on the program.
Yes, and everybody, I will have Mark's links listed below along with the links to Amazon. You can get this book right now, and, you know, the holidays are coming up. Take some time to read. You will enjoy it. So thank you, Mark. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
I could talk to Mark all day, and I knew he'd have a lot to say about the funeral today. I don't know that I expected quite what he said, but I could talk to him for hours. I could just ask him questions all day. I love this stuff. This is why I love history, and it's because of people like him that I love history. So everybody please hit like if you liked our talk. I'm going to put all the links listed below. Thank you so much, Mark. I can't wait to talk to you again. Have a great day, everyone.